This is my true story. I married her when we were both young, full of hope and small dreams. When illness took her sight, I swore I'd be her eyes. For 25 years I became her guide, her cook, her narrator of sunsets she could no longer see. Every day I built my life around her darkness, telling myself this was love, not duty. I never let her feel helpless, even when my own hands trembled. Until one night, she called another man's name in her sleep, and everything changed. Before I tell you what really happened that night, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so more people hear my story. We were married before either of us understood what forever really meant. Back then, she could see everything. The world, my face, her future, all in color. We built a small life together, one of simple things. Morning walks, shared meals, evenings filled with laughter. Then, slowly, her world began to fade. It started with her squinting at the newspaper, then holding my hand tighter when crossing the street. The doctors said it was permanent. Her eyes would never recover. I remember the day she lost her sight completely. She sat by the window and cried until the sun went down. That night, I made her a promise. You'll never face the dark alone. And I kept that promise. For 25 years, I became her eyes, her world, her anchor in the storm. Every morning, I woke before her, made breakfast, and described the day's light. The sun is bright today, and the sky looks soft, like pale blue cloth. She'd smile faintly, as if trying to picture it. I guided her from room to room, my voice her compass. When she asked about the world, I painted it with words. The laughter of children, the smell of rain, the way spring touched the garden with green. Her blindness changed everything about our marriage, but not my devotion. I turned every act of care into a prayer, every chore into a small offering of love. I dressed her, brushed her hair, read her favorite books aloud. At night, I'd describe the sunset she couldn't see, its colors, its fading light, until she drifted off to sleep. When she reached out for me in the dark, I always took her hand. I told myself that was love. That was purpose. The years passed quietly, but not easily. People admired my loyalty, said I was a good husband. I smiled and thanked them, never mentioning the weight I carried. Caring for someone blind isn't just about what you do. It's about what you give up. My hobbies, my travels, my rest, all slowly disappeared, replaced by routine. But I told myself it was worth it. After all, she needed me. She trusted me. She loved me. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I'd wonder what she saw in her mind. Did she imagine my face when I spoke? Did she still picture the man she married, or had time erased me too? I never asked. I didn't want to burden her with my insecurity. My role was to be strong, her guide, her voice, her constant. I never once let her feel helpless, even when I did. There were nights I sat alone, watching her sleep, her face calm in the faint light. I'd think, maybe this is what real love is, sacrifice without applause. I convinced myself that devotion could fill the space where passion used to live. That maybe love, like sight, changes form, but never dies. So I endured. I told myself faith was enough, that time could not break us, that blindness would never win as long as I stayed. And for years it worked. We had our rhythm, our small world, our quiet peace. I believed I'd fulfilled my promise, that she was safe in her darkness because I had become her light. But love, I would learn, isn't always grateful. Sometimes it grows used to the hand that guides it. Sometimes it starts to take comfort for granted. And sometimes it hides secrets even in blindness. I never imagined betrayal could wear the same gentle face I'd kissed every night. I never imagined that the darkness she lived in was hiding a truth I was too loyal to see. I thought I was her world. I thought I was her everything. But one night, her dreams spoke louder than my devotion, and shattered the promise I had lived by for 25 years. My life had settled into a rhythm so predictable it felt like breathing. Every sound, every movement in that house revolved around her. I could tell where she was by the soft shuffle of her feet, or the small tap of her cane against the floor. I learned the language of her silence, the tilt of her head when she was listening, the curve of her lips when she smiled at something I said. I knew her world better than my own. The room stayed the same because change frightened her, and I made sure nothing ever moved out of place. Even the furniture seemed loyal to her blindness. Every morning began with her voice calling softly from the bedroom. "Is it morning yet?" I'd answer, "Yes, love." The lights up. Then I'd guide her to the kitchen, her hand resting on my arm like a bird afraid to fall. I'd pour her coffee exactly the way she liked, 1 sugar, no milk, and describe the day for her while she listened. "It's a bright morning," I'd say. "The garden's alive. You should hear the sparrows today." She'd smile and tilt her head toward the window, listening to the world I narrated for her. I read to her every afternoon, sometimes from her favorite novels, sometimes from the newspaper. I told her stories about the colors of dresses in the magazine, the patterns of sunlight on the curtains. She would laugh softly, saying, "You make it sound beautiful." And I believed her. I believed that through my words, she saw again that love could be enough to replace sight. Evenings were the hardest. When the light faded and the world outside grew quiet, she would ask me to sit beside her. "Tell me what sunset looks like today," she'd whisper. I'd describe it in detail, the orange melting into pink, the horizon like a brushstroke fading into night. I'd do it even when I was too tired to think straight, even when my body ached. I told myself this was my purpose, to make sure her world never felt empty. But devotion has a price. Years of care wear down the soul in ways no one can see. There were days when exhaustion hit me so hard I wanted to cry. My back ached from guiding her everywhere, my hands rough from chores. Yet I smiled, because that's what she needed to hear. The neighbors praised me. "You're an example of love, of patience." I nodded, but I knew better. I wasn't noble. I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped caring, she'd fall. Afraid that if I left, I'd become the villain in her story. I used to think love could survive anything, but after years of routine, it starts to blur with duty. I couldn't remember the last time she had said my name with warmth, not just as a habit, but as if she still felt something behind it. Our conversations had turned mechanical. She'd ask what time it was, what the weather was like, where her shawl was. I'd answer, patient, polite, automatic. There were no arguments, no laughter, just quiet coexistence. Still, I convinced myself that this was love in its truest form, quiet, loyal, endless. Every night before bed, I would sit by her side, adjust her pillow, and whisper, "Good night, love." She'd turn her head slightly, whisper back, "Good night," and smile faintly. That smile was enough to keep me going, even when I felt hollow inside. I didn't need much, just that one moment of recognition, that small proof that I still mattered. Looking back, I see now that love had become one-sided. I was the caretaker. She was the center. My life was orbiting hers so tightly that I forgot I existed outside of her blindness. I thought that was devotion. I thought that was marriage. I thought that by serving her, I was saving us. I didn't know that while I spent years keeping her world intact, mine was quietly disappearing. I had given her everything, my time, my strength, my youth, and I truly believed that in her darkness, she saw only me. I never imagined that her blindness hid more than just the world outside. It hid a truth I wasn't meant to see. It happened on one of those nights that felt ordinary, quiet, soft, the kind that made you grateful for routine. I had helped her into bed, brushed her hair back, and turned off the lamp. She liked me to describe the darkness to her before she fell asleep. "It's calm tonight," I whispered. "The stars are faint, the moon's hidden. You'd like it." She smiled gently and said, "Then tell me about it tomorrow." I kissed her forehead, whispered good night, and lay down beside her. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. I thought she was asleep. I closed my eyes too, comforted by the familiar rhythm of her presence beside me, the faint rustle of sheets, the sighs, the stillness. But sometime past midnight, I woke to the sound of her voice. It wasn't loud, just a whisper, trembling, soft. I turned slightly, thinking she was calling for me. Then I heard it again, a name, a man's name, not mine. At first I thought I was still dreaming. I held my breath, waiting, praying I had misheard, but she said it again, clearer this time, tenderly, with affection I hadn't heard from her in years. My heart stopped. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. My mind raced. Maybe it was a coincidence, a fragment of memory, a dream from before we met. But the way she said it, there was longing in her voice, warmth that wasn't meant for me. I stayed perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to confirm what I already knew. Her hand, which usually searched for me in sleep, rested against her chest. Her lips moved again. Another whisper. Another sigh. My name never came. I could have convinced myself it was nothing if it had happened once. But she said it again. And then again, softly, almost smiling in her sleep. I turned toward her in the dark. The moon had slipped from behind the clouds, throwing a faint silver glow through the curtains. I saw her face, peaceful, gentle, untouched by guilt. It was a face I had memorized over decades of devotion, now foreign to me. Every wrinkle, every soft line around her mouth felt like a lie I hadn't known I was living. My chest tightened. I wanted to wake her, to ask who he was, to make her say my name instead, to prove that I hadn't given my life to someone who dreamed of another. But I couldn't. I just lay there, frozen, feeling the weight of every year pressing down on me. It was strange. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something worse. Hollow. Like the ground had quietly given way beneath me, and I was falling through memories that no longer meant what they used to. I thought about the countless times I'd held her hand, described a sunset, whispered that I loved her. Did she ever think of him then? Was she picturing another face when I said her name? The thought crawled under my skin and stayed there, burning slow. Hours passed. She kept murmuring softly, sometimes just sighing, sometimes saying that name again, like a prayer or a promise. When she finally went quiet, I lay awake until the first light crept through the curtains. I stared at the ceiling, numb, my heart beating too loud in the silence. When she stirred in the morning, she smiled the way she always did. "Good morning," she said sweetly, reaching for me. "Is it sunny today?" I looked at her. The woman I'd served, loved, protected. And for the first time, I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat. Because now, every act of kindness, every word I spoke, felt like it belonged to the wrong story. That night marked the end of something I couldn't name. She went back to sleep eventually, but I didn't. I lay there listening, waiting, afraid to hear that name again, and terrified that I wouldn't. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. The light felt colder, thinner, like it was sneaking into a house it no longer belonged to. I sat up before she woke, staring at the wall, the night still echoing in my head. Every second replayed. Her whisper, that name, the soft tenderness in her tone that I hadn't heard in years. I wanted to tell myself it was just a dream, that I'd imagined it. But the truth doesn't vanish when the sun rises. It just hides under the noise of the day. When she finally stirred, she stretched slightly, her hands brushing the sheets, her lips curling into a faint smile. "You're up early," she said. "I must have slept well." I turned to look at her, studying her face. The same familiar lines, the same gentle calm. There wasn't even a hint of guilt. "Did you?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, I dreamed of warmth and laughter. It felt nice." She reached out for my hand, and I gave it to her automatically, like I always did. But this time, it felt like a performance. My fingers felt heavy, my palm cold. In the kitchen, I made her breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, something that used to bring me peace. I poured her a cup, added the sugar the way she liked, and placed it in front of her. She smiled, wrapping her hands around the mug. "You make it just right," she said. Her smile, once my reward, now cut like glass. I watched her as she ate, every movement slow and graceful, her blindness so practiced it looked like elegance. She hummed softly, a habit she had when she was content. It was the same tune she always hummed after I told her I loved her, years ago. But now, that sound made my stomach twist. I wondered if she was humming for me, or for the man whose name she whispered in her dreams. Every word she spoke that morning carried new weight. "Thank you for breakfast. You're quiet today. Are you tired? Do you have errands to run?" Simple, harmless questions. Yet behind each one, I heard echoes of deceit. My mind began to fill the silence with doubt. I looked at her and realized how easy it was to hide lies from someone who couldn't see, and how easy it had been for me not to notice. Her blindness had made her dependent, but it had also made her untouchable. She lived in a world of sound and memory, where I was only what she allowed me to be. I found myself studying her more than usual. The way her lips curved when she smiled, the way she tilted her head when I spoke. I searched for cracks, for guilt, hesitation, shame, but found none. She was perfect in her calm, innocent in her blindness. Maybe that was the worst part, because while she couldn't see me, I was finally beginning to see her. I wanted to ask her about the name. I almost did. My mouth opened more than once, but no words came out. What if she denied it? What if she laughed? What if she said it was from before, a love that had nothing to do with me? Would that make it better? Number. Because no matter the explanation, the truth was already alive inside me. She had spoken another man's name with tenderness she hadn't used for mine in years. The rest of the day passed like a performance. I guided her through the house, described the weather, read from her favorite book. My voice was steady, my hands gentle, but everything inside me screamed. I wanted to shake her, to wake her from this illusion we were both pretending to live in. But she smiled and nodded and hummed, the perfect picture of contentment, and I played my role beside her. That night, when she went to bed, I stood by the doorway and watched her sleep. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, like the night before. But I couldn't close my eyes. I knew what peace sounded like, and this wasn't it. This was the sound of someone who had already found comfort elsewhere. The days that followed were unbearable in their sameness. From the outside, nothing had changed. She still reached for my arm when walking, still asked me to describe the weather, still smiled when I served her tea. But beneath those small moments, something inside me had cracked. The memory of that night wouldn't fade. It replayed each time her lips moved, each time her head tilted toward the sound of my voice. Every time she said my name, it sounded rehearsed, hollow, like an actor delivering a line. And somewhere deep inside, I began to wonder if she'd been performing all along. I told myself I was being foolish. 25 years of loyalty couldn't be undone by one name whispered in sleep. Maybe it was a ghost from her past, some buried memory surfacing through dreams. But the more I tried to bury my suspicion, the more it clawed its way back up. Doubt has a way of poisoning even the smallest details. The sound of her laughter started to sting. The softness of her hand felt foreign. Even her blindness, something I once protected with all my strength, began to feel like a shield between us, a wall she could hide behind. I began to notice things I'd never seen before. Little hesitations in her speech, long pauses when I asked her questions. Once, while I was reading aloud to her, she interrupted and said softly, "That voice. You don't sound like yourself today." I froze, the book trembling in my hands. "What do you mean?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "You sound tired." Or far away, she said it like a kindness, but it pierced deeper than any insult. Because she was right. I was far away. I was drifting somewhere between love and disbelief, between devotion and disgust. A week after that night, I woke again to her voice in the dark. Not a dream this time. A whisper, quiet and steady, like she was talking to someone who wasn't there. I listened, heart pounding, afraid to move. She said that same name. slowly, softly, followed by words that weren't meant for me. My chest burned. I sat there in silence, my fists clenching under the blanket, the sound of her whisper stretching time into something unbearable. When she finally went still, I stared at the ceiling until dawn, feeling like the walls were closing in. By the next morning, doubt had turned into obsession. I watched her constantly, searching for meaning in every word she spoke, every sigh she released. My life became an investigation. When she reached out for her cane, I noticed the way her fingers brushed the furniture as if tracing a familiar map. When I told her I was going out to the market, she smiled and said, "I'll be fine. Don't rush." I lingered outside the door, listening. She didn't call for me. She didn't move. She just sat there, silent, waiting. For what, or for who, I didn't know. It got to the point where even her blindness began to feel like deceit. How easy it must be, I thought, to lie when no one can see your eyes. How simple to live in a world where the truth can hide behind softness and need. I began to question everything I'd done, every sacrifice, every promise, every quiet act of love. Had I been a husband or a servant, a partner or a fool? The thought made my stomach turn. Then, one afternoon, while she napped, I found myself standing near the dresser she never touched. It was where I kept her old things, keepsakes from before the blindness, letters, jewelry, photographs. My hands moved on their own, pulling the drawer open. Inside, beneath folded scarves, I found something that shouldn't have been there. Envelopes, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded ribbon. My heart began to pound. I untied them, my fingers trembling. Her name was written on every one, and below it, the same man's name she had whispered in her sleep. The ink had faded, but the words were still sharp enough to cut. My hands trembled as I unfolded the first letter. The paper was fragile, edges yellow and soft from age, but the words were still alive, cruelly alive. His handwriting was neat, confident, and filled with the kind of warmth I hadn't seen from her in years. "My dearest Lily," it began. My breath caught. He called her by name, the way I once did when she could still see me, when our love still had color. But his tone was different. It wasn't polite or distant. It was intimate, familiar. "I still remember how your eyes looked that night, how the world disappeared when you smiled." I kept reading, my chest tightening with each line. The letters weren't just memories, they were love confessions. Raw, unfiltered, written long before I ever entered her life. He spoke about their plans, about running away together, about building a future somewhere by the sea. There were words like forever and always, and they hurt more than any blade could, because those were the same words I had spent 25 years trying to make true. When I reached the end of the first letter, I saw his name signed neatly at the bottom, the same name she had whispered in her sleep. I stared at it until my vision blurred. I read another, and another. Some were dated from months before her blindness, some after. And that was when the true betrayal took form. These letters didn't stop when her sight did. A few had marks of newer ink, and my heart froze. She had kept writing to him. Maybe she never sent them, but she wrote. The pen marks were heavy, pressed deep into the paper, like she'd been clinging to those words as if they were lifelines. "I still dream of you. I still see you when I sleep." I felt sick. 25 years of care, devotion, and faith, all while her heart was somewhere else. While I described sunsets for her, she dreamed of another man's smile. While I guided her through darkness, she followed his memory instead of my voice. I sat down, the letters scattered across my lap like ashes of something I thought was sacred. Part of me wanted to stop reading. The other part, the one broken beyond repair, needed to know everything, so I kept going. One letter stood out. It was dated 2 years after she lost her sight. "I know you can't see me anymore," it read, "but maybe that's better. Maybe now you'll remember me as I was, and not what I've become." My stomach turned. That meant he had come to her after the blindness. After me. I tried to remember if she had ever gone quiet on certain days, if there were moments she smiled for no reason. There had been, hundreds of them. Times she'd sit by the window, humming softly, her face calm, almost glowing. I thought she was at peace. Now I knew she was remembering him, loving him in silence while I sat beside her, blind in my own way. I picked up the last letter. It wasn't from him. It was to him. Her handwriting this time. Fragile, but steady. I still hear your voice in my dreams. I still reach for you in the dark. If life had been kinder, I would have followed you instead. My throat went dry. My hands shook so violently the paper almost tore. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of a love that wasn't mine. The room was silent except for the sound of my own breathing, shallow, uneven. I wanted to hate her, to scream, to throw the letters into the fire, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the words that proved I had spent 25 years being faithful to a woman who had never truly been mine. That night, when I helped her to bed, I didn't speak. She reached for my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to hold it. I looked at her face, calm, trusting, unseeing, and realized she didn't need sight to keep her secrets. Her blindness had protected her better than any wall could. The house no longer felt like home. Every corner whispered lies I had once mistaken for love. The walls that had heard my patience, my gentle words, my vows of loyalty, they now echoed with another man's name. I couldn't unsee the letters, couldn't unread the promises she had written for someone else. Every time I guided her through a doorway, my hands shook. Every touch reminded me that I had spent a lifetime tending to a heart that had never truly belonged to me. It wasn't anger that came first. It was disbelief. Quiet, cold disbelief that settled like frost over every memory I had cherished. How had I not seen it? The smiles that never reached her eyes, the moments she went silent when I spoke of our future, the way her hands trembled when she touched certain objects. I had explained it all away as grief, as fragility, as blindness. But now I knew better. She wasn't fragile. She was haunted, and I had been the caretaker of her ghost. For 25 years, I had given her my sight, my strength, my life. I cooked her meals, cleaned her home, told her what flowers bloomed outside her window. I thought I was filling her darkness with light. But now I realized I had only been keeping her past alive, nurturing the love she still felt for another man. Every sunset I described was a reminder of something he once said. Every word of affection I spoke was an echo she'd already heard. One evening, as I helped her to her chair, I asked softly, "Do you ever dream of the past?" She smiled faintly. "Sometimes." It's all I have left to see her words sliced through me. I wanted to ask which part of the past she saw. I wanted to ask if it was him she dreamed of when she smiled in her sleep. But I couldn't. I didn't need the answer. The silence between us already carried it. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in the dark, staring at her face. I tried to find the woman I had loved, the woman I had vowed to protect, but all I saw was a stranger wearing her shape. I thought about the years I had spent describing the world to her, every detail, every color, believing she listened because she loved my voice. Now I knew she listened because she couldn't forget his. The realization came slow but absolute. Her blindness hadn't taken him away. It had only hidden him from me. In her darkness, he was still alive, perfect, untouched by time. And I was just the man who made sure she never had to face the world without him. I wasn't her husband. I was her replacement for sight, her reminder of what she'd lost. My chest felt heavy, like breathing itself had turned into work. I went to the drawer where I'd found the letters and opened it again. The faint scent of old paper and faded perfume filled the air. I looked at her words, her careful handwriting, so tender, so certain, and I realized I had never received a letter like that from her. Not one word of affection written just for me. 25 years together, and she had never said my name with that kind of devotion. I wanted to hate her, but hate is too easy for those who once loved deeply. What I felt was worse, emptiness. Like every emotion had been drained from me, leaving behind a hollow man who'd spent his best years loving a lie. In that silence, I understood something painful but true. Love cannot exist where truth does not live. I had loved her completely, but she had never truly seen me. Not when her eyes worked, and not when they didn't. Her blindness wasn't her tragedy. It was mine. Because I had built a life around it, mistaking pity for passion, duty for devotion, and mercy for love. I sat there until dawn, surrounded by her secrets, my promise broken not by choice, but by truth. She had spent 25 years blind to the world, but I had spent 25 years blind to her. I didn't plan the confrontation. There was no speech rehearsed, no rage building up to a dramatic scene. It came quietly, like everything else in our life had. Slow, simple, inevitable. The morning light slid through the curtains, and I found myself standing by the table, the letters spread out like a confession she hadn't meant to give. She was sitting in her usual chair by the window, humming softly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her blindness had always made her seem fragile, but now I saw it differently. That calmness wasn't innocence. It was control. I picked up the last letter, the one with her handwriting, and held it tightly. My voice came out low, quiet enough to almost sound tender. "Who is Michael?" I asked. The name fell into the room like a stone dropped in still water. The humming stopped. Her hands froze mid-motion. The air shifted. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then her lips parted, just barely. A sound escaped, half gasp, half whisper. "What did you say?" she asked. I repeated it, slower this time. "Who is Michael?" Her head turned toward my voice, her eyes wide but unfocused. I watched her face carefully. There it was, recognition, not confusion, not denial, just the kind of stillness that comes from being caught between truth and memory. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, tears began to gather in the corners of her sightless eyes. They slid down her cheeks silently, one after another. I had seen her cry before, from pain, from frustration, from hopelessness, but never like this. This was something different. This was mourning. I placed the letter on the table between us. "I found them," I said quietly. "All of them. Every word you kept. Every promise you didn't forget." She reached forward instinctively, her fingers brushing the edge of the table, trembling. "You went through my things?" she asked weakly. There was no anger in her tone, just resignation. I almost laughed at the irony of it. "Yes," I said. "I did. After 25 years of giving you everything, I finally opened a drawer." Her hand found the letter, and she held it against her chest like it was oxygen. "He was before you," she said finally. Her voice cracked, but there was no apology in it. "Before all of this. Before the blindness. Before—" She stopped, swallowing the rest. "He was my sight." My throat tightened. "And what was I?" I asked. She didn't answer. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. I took a step closer, my voice trembling now. "I gave you my life, my youth, my strength. I became your world. And all this time, you were dreaming of another man?" Her tears kept falling, but her expression didn't change. She whispered, almost pleading, "You don't understand." The blindness took him away, not you. But in my dreams, he was still there. I couldn't let him go. I didn't mean to. I cut her off. "You didn't mean to call his name in your sleep?" My tone hardened, but my body felt weak. "You didn't mean to keep his letters? To write to him years after I married you? Tell me, what exactly didn't you mean?" She bowed her head, gripping the letter tighter. "You were good to me," she said softly. "Better than I deserved. But I never asked you to replace him." That sentence crushed whatever part of me was left holding on. It was the kind of truth that didn't scream. It whispered, and still broke you in half. I stood there, staring at her, realizing I had been nothing but the caretaker of a memory. I had loved her faithfully, while she had loved someone who existed only in the dark. The room felt heavy with finality. I couldn't find anger anymore, only emptiness. I stepped closer, leaned down, and said his name one last time, not as a question, but as a farewell. Her breath hitched sharply, her lips trembled. She whispered his name again, softly, painfully, as if saying it one more time could bring him back. That was all the answer I needed. The next morning, the house was colder than I had ever felt it. The light slipped through the curtains like thin threads of silver, touching the table where the letters still lay. I hadn't moved them. I wanted her to feel them there, like truth sitting out in the open, impossible to ignore. She didn't call for me that morning. Usually, she would ask for help with her robe, or for coffee, or for me to describe the light outside. But that day, silence filled the house, deep, heavy, knowing. I walked to the doorway of her room. She was sitting up, fully dressed, her cane leaning beside the bed. Her hands rested in her lap, still and calm, like she'd been waiting for me. For a moment, I saw her as I always had. Delicate, lost, someone I needed to protect. But then she turned her head toward me and said softly, "I heard you pack last night." I didn't deny it. There was no point. I had been up all night folding clothes, quietly moving pieces of my life into an old suitcase. I had touched every item with care, not because I wanted to take them, but because I was saying goodbye to the man who had owned them, the man who stayed, the man who forgave. She spoke again, barely above a whisper. "You're leaving." "Yes," I said simply. The word didn't echo. It landed flat in the air, like a truth too tired to fight. She nodded once, slowly. Her hands tightened on her cane. "You were good to me," she said. "Better than anyone else could have been." I waited, but that was all she said. No apology, no plea. Just a quiet confession that felt more like an ending than an acknowledgement. I took a step into the room, the floorboards creaking beneath me. "For 25 years, I said, my voice trembling. "I gave you everything. I described the world you couldn't see. I made sure you never felt alone. And the whole time, you were dreaming about a man who never even came back for you." Her lips parted, but no sound came. I saw her shoulders shake slightly, but I didn't know if it was from guilt or from something else. Maybe relief that the lie had finally ended. "I don't hate you," I continued. "But I can't stay here. Not after knowing that my love was just a shadow you walked through." I walked toward the window and opened it. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and soil. She flinched slightly, startled by the sudden sound. "It's raining?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "The sky's gray." She smiled faintly, a ghost of the woman I used to love. "I always liked the rain," she murmured. I stood there for a long moment, watching her. The woman I'd once promised the world to. The woman who had let me believe I was her world. Her blindness no longer looked tragic to me. It looked like a shield she had built long ago, and I had spent my life keeping it intact. I placed her cane beside her chair and spoke one last time. "You won't need me anymore. The house is yours. The letters too. You can keep them if they still bring you comfort." She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just sat there, her eyes turned toward the window as though she could see through the sound of my footsteps. I picked up my suitcase, paused at the doorway, and said quietly, "Goodbye." The word felt strange, final, but not cruel. It didn't belong to anger, it belonged to freedom. I stepped outside, the rain touching my face, cool and honest. Behind me, the house stayed silent. I didn't look back. The road ahead was empty, wet and long. My shoes splashed through puddles as I walked, and with each step, the weight in my chest began to ease. The air smelled clean, the kind of clean that comes only after a storm. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in 25 years, I didn't need to describe the world to anyone else. I just needed to see it for myself. It has been months since I walked out that door, and yet her voice still echoes in my mind. Not the voice that asked for help, Not the soft thank yous or the laughter I used to live for, but the one that whispered another man's name in her sleep. That sound has never left me. It follows me into every quiet morning, every evening spent alone. Sometimes I still hear her humming in the distance, and for a heartbeat, I forget. I turn around expecting to find her there, smiling faintly, reaching for my hand. But it's only the wind moving through the trees. The silence that follows feels both painful and peaceful, like a wound that finally started to heal. My life now is simple. I rent a small room above a bakery in a nearby town. The mornings smell of bread and rain, and the world feels larger than I remembered. I wake when I want, make my own coffee, and step outside just to feel the sunlight. For years, I used to describe that warmth to her, how it glowed on the window panes, how it painted the sky gold. Now, I stand under it and let it touch my skin without saying a word. I no longer have to speak life into someone else's darkness. I just live mine in the light. People sometimes ask if I was ever married. I pause before answering. There's always a strange ache behind the truth. I tell them yes, once, to a woman who taught me everything about love, patience, and the danger of both. They nod politely, never asking for details. They don't know that love can be a prison disguised as devotion, that loyalty can slowly become blindness of its own. They don't know what it means to care for someone so completely that you forget you exist outside their need. I think back often to those 25 years, and I wonder if she ever understood what I gave up for her. The world thinks blindness is darkness, but it's not. It's stillness. It's waiting. And I waited for her every single day, to see me, to love me, to remember that I was the man who stayed. But she never did. Her heart was somewhere I couldn't follow, and her dreams belonged to a ghost I could never compete with. It took me half a lifetime to realize that some people never truly lose their first love. They just bury them inside their silence. There are nights when guilt creeps in, whispering that I should have stayed longer, forgiven more, tried harder. But then I remember how she said his name, how her lips softened around it in a way they hadn't for mine in decades. That memory keeps me from romanticizing the past. It reminds me that love without truth is just service. And I had served her faithfully while she loved someone who existed only in her dreams. I've learned that devotion can destroy you quietly. You start out believing it's love, the giving, the patience, the sacrifices. But eventually it eats your identity. You stop being a husband, a man, a person. You become an extension of their weakness, their need, their comfort. I had built my entire life around her blindness, and in doing so, I lost sight of myself. Leaving wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Sometimes I imagine her still sitting in that same chair by the window, her hands folded neatly, her eyes turned toward the light she'll never see. I wonder if she still dreams of him. Maybe she does. Maybe she always will. But I no longer envy him. I pity him. Because in the end, he never had to live beside her silence. I did. And somehow, that made me the one who truly knew her. Not the version she loved, but the truth she couldn't face. Final thought. I took care of my blind wife for 25 years, believing love was enough to replace sight. But when she called another man's name in her sleep, I finally saw what blindness really meant. She lived in darkness, but I was the one who could never see.